1453 was a year that changed England forever. It marked the end of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that had dragged on for over a century, beginning in 1337. England had once held vast territories in northern and western France. King Edward III had fought to reclaim these lands, even daring to claim the French throne itself. For a time, England had victories that seemed almost miraculous, particularly at the Battle of Azincourt in 1415, where the English army's skill with longbows decimated French forces and brought the dream of a dual crown tantalizingly close. Yet these triumphs proved fleeting. By the middle of the 15th century, England had lost nearly all its territories in France. Rouen fell in 1449, Bordeaux in 1451, and the decisive Battle of Castillon on July 17, 1453, sealed England's defeat. The psychological toll on the monarchy was immediate. King Henry VI, barely 31 years old, suffered a complete collapse, leaving him catatonic for over 18 months. Across the kingdom, rebellion simmered as nobles and commoners alike reacted to the humiliation abroad and the apparent weakness at home. Amid this chaos, one figure emerged as a beacon of hope: Richard, the third Duke of York. A great-grandson of Edward III, Richard was a military leader, politically astute, and, crucially, popular among the nobility and common people alike. Many believed he could rescue England from its decline, but claiming power was never simple. The ensuing struggle between Richard's Yorkist faction and the Lancastrian monarchy, Henry VI and his queen, Margaret of Anjou, would erupt into one of England's most famous dynastic conflicts, the Wars of the Roses. To understand the House of York, we must trace its origins and the intricate politics of medieval England. Centuries before Richard's rise, England had been fragmented into kingdoms like Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia. Viking invasions in the 9th century reshaped the political landscape, and by the 11th century, a unified Kingdom of England had emerged, only to be transformed yet again in 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, invaded, reshaping the nobility and linking English kings to lands in northern France. These continental holdings, later supplemented by dynastic marriages, set the stage for generations of territorial conflict with France, culminating in the 100 Years' War. Edward III's descendants, including Edmund of Langley, the first Duke of York, inherited claims that would shape English politics for centuries. Born in 1341 at King's Langley, Edmund became a pivotal figure linking England's northern estates to the Yorkist claim. Though young during early campaigns in France, Edmund's rise to prominence through inheritance and royal favour laid the foundation for the House of York. These continental holdings, later supplemented by dynastic marriages, set the stage for by 1377, Edward III had died, leaving the throne to his grandson, Richard II. Edmund of Langley's family maintained influence during Richard's turbulent reign, navigating alliances and rivalries among the English nobility. When Richard II was overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke, Henry XIV, power shifted to the House of Lancaster. Yet the Yorkist lineage remained a crucial political force. Edmund's son, Edward, the second Duke of York, continued to strengthen the family's position, participating in military campaigns and court affairs, though he died at the Battle of Azincourt in 1415, leaving the title to his young nephew, Richard of York. These continental holdings, later supplemented by dynastic marriages, set the stage for by 1377, Edward III had died, leaving the throne to his grandson, Richard II. Edmund of Langley's family maintained influence during Richard's turbulent reign, navigating alliances and rivalries among the English nobility. When Richard II was overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke, Henry XIV, power shifted to the House of Lancaster. Yet the Yorkist lineage remained a crucial political force. Edmund's son, Edward, the second Duke of York, continued to strengthen the family's position, participating in military campaigns and court affairs, though he died at the Battle of Azincourt in 1415, leaving the title to his young nephew, Richard of York. The conflicts between Yorkists and Lancastrians erupted into open war by 1455. The Battle of St. Albans and subsequent clashes saw Yorkist forces initially gain the upper hand, demonstrating Richard's strategic brilliance. Yet the struggle for control of England was not only military, it was also deeply dynastic. Richard's claim to the throne was bolstered by his descent from Edward III through both his father, Edmund of Langley, and his mother, Anne Mortimer, connecting him to the line of Lionel, Duke of Clarence. Despite these legitimate claims, Richard would die in 1460 at the Battle of Wakefield, leaving his son, Edward, as the Yorkist heir. Edward IV, only 18, proved to be an extraordinary leader. He rallied Yorkist forces, defeating Lancastrians at Mortimer's Cross and Towton, ultimately being crowned king in 1461. Edward IV's reign brought relative stability, yet challenges persisted. Powerful nobles, including Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, posed both a help and a threat, while Lancastrian remnants, led by Margaret of Anjou and her son Edward of Westminster, continued to resist. Edward's temporary overthrow in 1470, followed by his triumphant return and final victory at Barnet and Tewkesbury in 1471, solidified Yorkist dominance. Yet the premature deaths of Henry VI, Edward of Westminster, and other Lancastrian heirs underscored the fragility of dynastic power. The House of York's legacy extended beyond Edward IV. Richard III's usurpation and the mysterious disappearance of Edward V and his brother in the Tower of London reignited the Wars of the Roses. Henry Tudor, later Henry VII, would ultimately defeat Richard III at Bosworth Field in 1485, ending Yorkist rule but uniting the houses of York and Lancaster through his marriage to Elizabeth of York, ensuring the Yorkist bloodline continued indirectly within the Tudor dynasty. Even beyond their rule, the Yorkist influence persisted. Titles like the Duke of York continued to shape English succession, culminating in modern times with the naming of New York following the English seizure of New Amsterdam. The York legacy is a story of ambition, warfare, and the fragile threads of dynastic inheritance that shaped the course of English history. From the devastation of 1453 to the death of Richard III and the rise of the Tudors, the House of York represents both the potential and peril inherent in medieval kingship. 1453 was a year that plunged England into crisis. The long, drawn-out Hundred Years' War, which had begun over a century earlier in 1337, was finally coming to an end, but not in England's favour. King Edward III had once dreamed of uniting the crowns of England and France, achieving remarkable victories along the way, including the famous triumph at Agincourt in 1415. But decades later, the tide had turned. By 1453, England had lost nearly all its French territories. Rouen, the proud capital of English Normandy, fell in 1449. Bordeaux was lost in 1451. And on the 17th of July, at the Battle of Castillon, the final blow was struck. England's ambitions on the continent were over. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. King Henry VI, who had inherited the throne as a child, suffered a severe psychological collapse. For over a year, he was practically catatonic, unable to make decisions or even interact with those around him. The country teetered on the edge of chaos. Rebellions erupted, authority crumbled, and people looked desperately for a savior. Many turned to one man, Richard, the third Duke of York. A descendant of King Edward III, a seasoned commander and a charismatic leader, Richard seemed to embody hope for a nation on the brink. Richard's ambitions were not merely personal. England itself was fractured, and as Henry's weakness became painfully clear, the stage was set for conflict. Richard and his Yorkist allies began to assert themselves against the Lancastrians, the ruling house of Henry VI, setting the stage for what would become the Wars of the Roses, a bloody struggle that would shape the monarchy for decades. But to understand Richard and the rise of the House of York, one must look further back to the tangled roots of England's royal and political history. In the early Middle Ages, England was not a single kingdom, but a patchwork of territories. Mercia, Wessex, Northumbria, and East Anglia, each with its own rulers and conflicts. Over centuries, Wessex gradually unified the land, only for it to be disrupted in 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, invaded and seized the throne. The Norman conquest reshaped England forever, intertwining English and French lands and planting the seeds for centuries of continental conflict. The Plantagenets, descendants of William the Conqueror, came to dominate the throne. King Henry II, who took power in 1154, expanded the dynasty's French holdings, though later generations struggled to hold them. By 1337, when Edward III launched his campaign to reclaim lost territories, England was already deeply invested in the fate of France. The ensuing Hundred Years' War would define English politics, drain its resources, and sow the seeds of domestic unrest. Within this turbulent world, Edmund of Langley, born in 1341 at King's Langley in Hertfordshire, rose to prominence. The fourth son of Edward III, Edmund was granted vast estates in Yorkshire, connecting him indelibly to the north. In 1385, he was created Duke of York, establishing the line that would eventually claim the throne. Though York was not the largest city, it was a centre of political and religious power, making the title one of significant influence. Edmund navigated the treacherous waters of English politics with caution, maintaining a moderate stance even as his nephew, King Richard II, faced rebellion and aristocratic opposition. When Henry Bolingbroke, son of John of Gaunt, returned from exile to seize the throne as Henry IV, Edmund's careful diplomacy ensured that the House of York survived politically intact. His son, Edward of Norwich, succeeded him as the second Duke of York, but died without heirs in 1415, leaving the title and estates to young Richard of York, who was barely 4 years old. The boy inherited vast lands and influence, but also a world on the brink of chaos. Henry V's death in 1422 left an infant king, Henry VI, whose incapacity would define a generation of conflict. By the 1440s, Richard of York had grown into a capable and ambitious leader. As Henry VI faltered under the pressures of lost French territories and weak governance, York emerged as the man many believed could save England. His appointment as Lord Protector in 1454 gave him the authority to restructure government and strengthen his allies, notably the powerful Neville family in the north. But this only intensified tensions with the Lancastrians, particularly the Beaufort faction, who sought to dominate the king. The confrontation was inevitable. In 1455, at the Battle of St. Albans, York and his forces clashed with the Lancastrians, capturing the king and killing his rival, the Duke of Somerset. This marked the true beginning of the Wars of the Roses, a brutal struggle for the English crown that would claim the lives of thousands and see the throne change hands multiple times. Richard's death at Wakefield in 1460 could have ended the Yorkist cause, but his son Edward, just 18, took up the mantle with remarkable skill. Victories at Mortimer's Cross and Towton solidified Edward's power, and by June 1461 he was crowned King Edward IV. A man of charisma, height and energy, Edward IV restored stability, reasserted royal authority, and sought to expand England's influence abroad. Yet even Edward's reign was not without peril. Noble rivalries persisted, and in 1470, Warwick the Kingmaker briefly restored Henry VI to the throne, forcing Edward into exile. Returning with mercenary support, Edward defeated the Lancastrians at Barnet and Tewkesbury, eliminating the last serious Lancastrian threats. With Henry VI and his heir dead, Edward IV ruled unchallenged until his sudden death in 1483. His untimely passing left the throne to his 12-year-old son, Edward VIII, whose uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, seized power as Richard III. This act reignited civil war, and ultimately Richard III would be killed at Bosworth Field in 1485 by Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII. By marrying Elizabeth of York, Henry united the warring houses of Lancaster and York, founding the Tudor dynasty. Though the House of York was extinguished as a ruling line, its legacy persisted. Through claims, marriages, and political maneuvering, Yorkist blood remained entwined with the English monarchy, influencing politics and succession long after their fall from power. The title Duke of York survived in tradition, linking generations of heirs to a lineage that once held the destiny of England in its grasp.